Okay. So for this very interesting session that we have today, as on the last day of our faculty development program on CRISPR-Cas technology and genome editing on the basis of CRISPR-Cas, we have a really a good expert in the field of plant biotechnology and plant molecular biology, Professor Rita Sharma, with us. So to again introduce Professor Rita Sharma with all of you, I would like to share her experiences, the awards she has got, and her profile in brief with everyone. So Professor Rita Sharma is a doctorate in plant molecular biology from Delhi University South Campus. Her thesis of her doctoral research was based on transcriptome profiling during panicle development in indica rice and functional characterization of candidate genes and promoters in transgenic rice and Arabidopsis. She is also a gold medalist in her master's degree from Guru Nanak Dev University, Amritsar. So Professor Sharma has done her postdoctoral research at Department of Plant Pathology and the Genome Center, University of California, Davis, at USA. She is also a proud recipient of Ramalinga Swami Fellowship, which she pursued at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She is also awarded with the Indo-US Get-In Fellowship at Joint Bioenergy Institute, Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and US Berkeley in California, USA. She has also worked as UGC Assistant Professor, School of Computational and Integrative Sciences at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. And currently, Professor Sharma is working as an associate professor at Department of Biological Sciences, Birla Institute of Technology and Science at Pilani, which we have known as BITS Pilani in Rajasthan. So, also Professor Sharma is an associate editor at Plant Biotechnology in Plant Biotechnology Journal, and she has specially edited the section of Frontiers in Plant Sciences and Frontiers in Bioengineering and Biotechnology. She has also edited besides this she has also edited and reviewed several research articles in this area. So she is a reviewer editor of Frontiers in Plant Sciences. She is also a founding member of Asia Pacific Bioinformatics Interaction and Networking Society. She is a lifetime member of Indian Society for Plant Physiology and International Society for Computational Biology. She also got a certificate of appreciation for witnessing the Republic Day parade in year 2005 as a guest of Honorable Prime Minister of India in recognition of her academic performance in post graduation. So, Professor Sharma is a NET qualified doctoral research fellow, and she was amongst top 20% of qualified scholars in year 2003. So, also Professor Sharma has published her publications in different national and international peer-reviewed journals, and she has published almost more than 50 to more than 60, I should say, research articles. And she has delivered talks in various national and international conferences, also where she has presented her research work. So we are so proud to have Professor Sharma presenting and making us learn in this session for our CRISPR-Cas FDP. And personally also, so as I try to add on a personal touch with each and every one of our expert speakers. So personally also, you would be very happy to know that Professor Sharma is a very jolly person. So I have interacted her earlier also, and in my professional career, sometime I've worked in JNU as well. So I've always find her to be accommodative. She is a pleasing person who would take everything with a smile. So I am so very impressed with this quality of Professor Sharma. Besides her scientific achievements, she's an expert in her field, and she is a very good person by nature. So I warmly welcome Professor Sharma and would request her to start her session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meghna. It was a very, very generous introduction. And I'm really grateful for you inviting me here. So it's always a pleasure, and I also have similar experience interacting with you. So it's very difficult to say no to a person like you, anyways.
No, no,
So
ma'am.
thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope the participants will have something to take home from this lecture as well. Because as we discussed, there are people from different backgrounds, but I'll try that everybody will have something to take home. So with
Definitely.
that, I'll just start with the presentation. I hope the slides are visible now, and I'm clearly audible.
Yes, ma'am. Your voice is clear. Your slides are in full screen mode, so we are ready.
Okay, perfect. So I guess since we have been talking about CRISPR technology for almost like 5 days now, so you all are aware how it works. So I'll not go into those details. And the applications, as Dr. Meghna said, has also been covered in plant biotechnology. So we will not go there, that what are the different types of applications. But I just wanted to bring this slide, of course, to you to show that what is its relevance for, especially for plant scientists, because plant scientists have been working for decades to make modified crops, but none of them really saw the light of the day because of the extreme regulations and the cost involved in development of the products. But with genome editing, it is a hope for us. It is a seed of change that has been sown, which is now going to bring this technology into light, and we will be able to, and our farmers will be able to take advantage of this technology. So this slide is basically just to show you overall take of the world in terms of acceptance for the genome editing crops. And except for European Union and New Zealand, which have a very clear stance that they consider genome edited crops also as transgenics, most of the countries have much relaxed stance for the transgenics. India has not come up with the clear regulations yet, although the draft is there, which is under processing. But among many countries, the countries like Canada, USA, Brazil, so all these countries are going to consider GMO on a case-on-case basis, where regulatory approvals may be exempted if the change because of the genome editing is not a huge and it's only a few bases. And the countries like Israel, Japan, and Australia have been even more forthcoming, where they clearly declared that they will not consider genome edited crops as transgenic, so no regulatory approvals are required. And this is already giving hope to the people in countries like Japan, where there is already a product, a tomato, which we call as Chilean rook high GABA tomato, which has already been engineered by a commercial company and is available in the market in Japan. And this is specifically for people to lower their blood pressure. This has been engineered. So these kind of products can actually see the hit the market soon if we have all these other countries who still have under discussion or consultation procedure going on would have a more positive view for looking at genome edited crops. And another important factor for plant scientists is that usually when we try to generate a modified crop plant, it takes at least 8 to 10 years of work. So most of the scientists throughout their life, if they can generate one modified or improved crop, that is like their lifetime achievement. And then again, it does not see the market first, because you can do this groundwork where you can improve the trade, but for commercialization you need companies, you need biotech companies which should be willing to invest, and they are going to look at the market and the expense involved. So most of the expense, although goes in development and discovery, there is a huge amount of investment in regulatory testing and registration, which again was a very discouraging for the plant biotech companies. So that is why not many people, not many plant biotech companies were forthcoming for the commercialization of these crops, especially in Asian countries. But with genome editing, this time which is required for development of the edited crops or modified or improved crops, I must say, has almost reduced to half or one third. And the cost of regulatory testing can be minimized or completely avoided if the change is equivalent to a normal mutation breeding. So this is just to show you that some of the companies in United States are already in the process of commercialization of some of the genome edited crops. The genome edited soybean, which has been edited for higher oleic content and a longer fry life, which means you can reuse it several times for frying. It's already available in the market in United States. And the other products in line which are expected to come out soon is genome edited canola and genome edited waxy corn, and you might have heard about mushroom also. So there is a hope that we will soon, in countries like United States and Japan, they're already hitting the market, but hopefully in India also we'll see something like this in the future, where we would have edited crops in the market. Now, when we design a CRISPR-Cas system in our laboratory for editing any gene, the three different components which are required is, first is Cas9 and guide RNA, and these two are normally most talked about. But a third important component which is less talked about and less studied is regulatory elements, which are used to derive the expression of guide RNA and Cas protein. So when we are trying to make an edited crop, we have two choices. Number one, we can either express guide RNA and Cas proteins in vitro, and we can actually insert them or transform them into the host using ribonucleoprotein complexes, and they can do the editing. So the amount of guide RNA and Cas9 can be optimized, which is required for editing. So this is not going to get integrated into the genome. But most of the plants, at least, and most of the genome edited stuff which is right now in the line of commercialization would use a construct where you would have Cas9 driven by a separate promoter and a guide RNA driven by a different promoter. So those promoter regulatory elements are also very, very important aspect of design of the strategy for genome editing. And we will discuss in next 1 hour how and what is the progress that has been made so far. And most of that work has been done in past 1 or 2 years only. So it's a very, very recent work that I'm going to talk about. When we talk about genome editing, as I said, Cas9 also has to have an individual promoter, and guide RNA also need to have its own promoter. So usually the system that came up initially when genome editing came up, and which was highly used was, and most of the papers you will find, where Pol2 promoter, which is driven by RNA polymerase 2, and Pol3, which is recognized by RNA polymerase 3, were used for Cas9 and guide RNA respectively, because guide RNAs are smaller in length. So people preferred Pol3 and thought that they would be much more efficient to use for driving guide RNA expression, whereas Pol2 were used for the Cas9, driving Cas9 expression. And then you need to have a terminator in between. But this terminator also has to be a strong terminator, because if terminator is weak, sometimes the Pol2 transcription will be carried forward to the next, and it will interfere in the transcription of the guide RNAs. So this was the system which has been traditionally been used, and in animals as well as plants when the technology came into light. So we had Pol2 promoter, so for Cas9, and Pol3 promoter for guide RNA. This is a guide RNA processing system which is required for processing of guide RNA once the transcription has happened. And this type of system or expression construct design was called as the mixed promoter system. Then people realized that Pol3 promoters had certain issues. So initially they were chosen because they can transcribe tRNAs, 5S RNAs, and other small non-coding RNAs very efficiently in the system. So it was obvious choice to derive the expression of guide RNA, and mostly you would have already noticed that U6 and U3 promoters are the ones which are used for driving guide RNA expression in these studies. And again, the origin of these promoters, whether it is U6 or U3, can be either endogenous, which means it can be either taken from the same host. So for example, if I am doing editing in cotton, I can take cotton U6 U3 promoter, or I can use Arabidopsis U6 U3 promoter. That will be a heterologous system. So in both of the types have been tried, and although, as you can assume, endogenous promoter is supposed to give a higher efficiency compared to the heterologous promoter. And in some cases, because these promoters are also long, to reduce the size, people have tried to trim them up, and that also has been shown to improve the efficiency of the editing. So we have three different options when we are going with the Pol3 promoters for guide RNA delivery. One is using the endogenous U3 or U6 promoters from the same host, or if you already have a vector which already has a U3, U6 promoter for another system, let's say Arabidopsis, rice, maize, and if it is able to drive expression in your system, that can also be used. And sometimes you may want to modify it to again enhance the expression. But the issue is that U6 and U3, their efficiency is highest when the guide RNA starts with G in case of U6 and if it starts with A in case of U3 promoters. So this many people don't take into consideration when they design guide RNAs, because this does not completely abolish the activity of U6 and U3. So if your guide RNA does not start with G or A, that does not mean that the editing cannot happen, but the efficiency may be lower. So ideally, you would like to find a guide RNA which has G to begin with or A to begin with if you are going with U6 or U3 promoter respectively. But that may not always be an option. So you have to see that already there is a constraint for designing guide RNA, that you have to design from the region which is not conserved, it is unique to your gene. And second, it has to be next to the PAM site. And now a third constraint comes that it has to start with G or A. So that was another constraint with using these promoters. And multiplex editing is very difficult. So initially when people were using just one guide RNA, and these Pol3 promoters can derive expression of the smaller fragments, this was working perfectly fine. But as people started coming up with the multiplex editing, where you want to use more than one guide RNA, so to facilitate editing, then this transcript will become longer and Pol3 will not be efficiently able to transcribe. So in those cases where you want to design, which is now the case, most of the people go with multiple guide RNAs for the same gene or for different genes, then in those cases you might want to reconsider whether you want to go with Pol3 promoter or not, because they cannot efficiently transcribe longer transcripts. And again, if a terminator in between is a weaker one, then you might see a carry forward transcription from Pol2, which will interfere in binding of the Pol3 here. And then because the efficiency of the Pol2 and Pol3 promoter is different, as you can imagine, Pol2 are much more stronger than the Pol3 promoters. So when you will have Cas9 expression will be very high, whereas the guide RNA expression would be comparatively low. So you don't get a 1:1 molar ratio of Cas9 and guide RNA expression. So guide RNA expression usually becomes limiting in terms of mutagenesis efficiency of the system. So you want to use a stronger promoter than Pol3 promoters, which can match the efficiency of Pol2. So those were the initial thoughts that were considered to again improve the strategy. And then also Pol3 promoters cannot be used in a tissue specific manner because they are ubiquitous promoters. So they derive expression of small RNAs in a ubiquitous manner. So you cannot really tune them to your needs. And that led to another system where the same Pol2 promoter was used for deriving Cas9 as well as guide RNA expression. So again, you can either use two different Pol2 promoters, or you can just use the same Pol2 promoter for deriving Cas9 and guide RNA expression. Now, although I said that in this case, the problem was that you cannot get 1:1 molar ratio because the promoter efficiency is different. Here also, when you are using same promoter for Cas9 and guide RNA, although the Cas9 and guide RNA transcripts may be equivalent, but again 1:1 molar ratio is not obtained because in Cas9 it has to make a protein. So guide RNA is acting in the form of a RNA, right? Whereas Cas9 first has to transcribe to make RNA, and then RNA has to be translated to make protein. So there is another level of regulation. So again, 1:1 ratio will not be obtained in terms of efficiency, but the efficiency will be comparable in the sense that you would still have a equivalently strong promoter for guide RNA expression. So guide RNA expression does not become limiting here. So this is another strategy which has also been frequently used in plant genome editing, where people have used two different or same Pol2 promoters. But the problem of transcript getting carried forward to another Pol2 again persists, although the rest is taken care of. Now again, the issue here is that if you want to design more than one guide RNA, then would you use separate promoter for separate guide RNA? So for example, there is one promoter with one guide RNA, and some people, when they initially started multiplex editing, they would use two promoters for two guide RNAs, three promoters for three guide RNAs, and so on. But later, there was a system evolved where you could actually put up something which can process different guide RNAs, so you can derive multiple guide RNAs from the same Pol2 promoter. So this helped in decreasing the size of the construct and taking advantage of the multiplex editing without making the construct huge. And also there was another strategy that came up again for the same reason, that the construct was becoming very bulky with the two different promoters. So then people saw that if you use the same strong pol 2 promoter for deriving both Cas9 and guide RNA, then you can actually skip second promoter, which will again reduce the size of the construct, and the same promoter can derive Cas9 as well as guide RNA expression. So you will have one continuous transcript which will be formed, and the linker is the one which is used to then again process and separate the guide RNA from the Cas9 expression before Cas9 goes for the protein synthesis. So this system has also been successfully used where a single promoter can derive expression of Cas9 as well as guide RNA. And again, here multiplex guide RNA editing has also been tried. So in plants, at least up to 24 guide RNAs in the same construct have been tried successfully. So usually the average that people go with without decreasing the efficiency is around 6 to 7 guide RNAs, but there is a demonstrated study where people have gone up to 24 also in the same construct. So this is a very efficient system in terms of that without making it so bulky, because specifically in transformation, the size of the construct becomes a very limiting, because if your method you are using does not have a carrying capacity of taking up such a bulky or huge construct, then you need to have something which is more concise. So this seemed like a very rationalized approach. And alternatively, people have also come up with the bidirectional promoter, though this has not been much explored in plants, but in case of animals and microbes, people have been using bidirectional promoters where Cas9 and guide RNA expression are separated in different directions, so that you don't have to worry about the carry forward of the transcription and to other components. So in this case, the same promoter is going to derive the expression of Cas9 and guide RNA, but they are inserted in such a way that it is in a different direction. So you have individual transcripts which are getting formed, and they don't need to be again processed to separate Cas9 and guide RNA. So this is relatively a newer system for plant scientists because this has not been really explored much, but in other organisms this has been explored. And I think some of you might even know better than me for this particular system. So when we talk about the pol 2 promoters, so far we realized that the pol 2 promoters seem to be a winner over the pol 3 promoters when we want to derive the Cas9 and guide RNA expression, and seems like it is a better idea to use pol 2 promoters for both guide RNA and the Cas9, either going through a bidirectional or a single transcript unit promoter, or even same promoter by using two different promoters. So whatever strategy suits your needs, you can go with that. And when we talk about pol 2 promoters, usually we have three different options. The first is that, as in case of transgenics also, we have been using microbial promoters which are deriving very high expression. So CMV and NOS-terminated promoter, NOS promoter, they have been quite frequently used for genome editing in plants. And some people have tried housekeeping genes of the plant themselves, for example, ubiquitin and actin. So because they derive very high expression, so you would see high editing efficiency also, because the amount of the guide RNA produced would be directly proportional to the editing efficiency. Not always, there are other factors also which are important, but you would see that there is a correlation in the amount of guide RNA and Cas9 expression and the editing efficiency. So the weaker the promoter, lower is the editing efficiency, and stronger is the promoter, higher is the editing efficiency. So by using these high expressing ubiquitous promoters, people have achieved high editing efficiency. But high editing efficiency also comes with a clause that it is also having high off-target effects, because guide RNA expression is now in abundant, Cas9 is also in abundant, and they have a fair chance of binding to the off-target sites and cause off-target effects. So although the editing efficiency has been reported more than 90% in some cases with these promoters, but the off-target effects is something which is worrying. So as we discussed, genome editing has a scope of going to market if the editing is not going to make huge changes and if it does not have off-target effect. Because if the technology is giving off-target effect, then we do not know the consequences of the technology, and it will be difficult to regulate the expression and see what were the possible consequences if they are commercialized. So this is a major issue if you really want to commercialize the genome edited plants, that you must reduce the off-target effects. And another factor that was also observed was the low inheritability, which means that once you do the editing, that has to pass on to next generations in a very you know uh, with high fidelity. But in some cases, it has been seen that you in T0 generation, for example, you see 90% editing efficiency. But in T1 generation, you see it is much more lower. And then in case of T2, it is even lower. So this low inheritability, where the ability to pass this edited mutation from one generation to next generation is observed in some genes, which may be important for the survival. And somehow the system tries to fix that mutation in other generation also. So although mutation happened in T0, but in T1, maybe that mutation was fixed by the internal repair system, and that lead to the original wild type gene. So this is not what we want, because if we want to grow edited crops, we want that the inheritability should be very, very high. And these factors, so these two issues of low inheritability and off target effects, to deal with that, there was another prospect that was introduced, where you could use tissue specific, inducible, or developmentally regulated promoters. So this concept is not new. In transgenics also, people have been using tissue specific and inducible promoters to drive the expression in specific tissues. But initially it is difficult to connect it with the genome editing, because you want all cells to be edited, right? Then why would you use a tissue specific promoter? So that is going to increase the efficiency in editing, because you are going to use the promoters which are going to be specifically in the tissues where there is high cell division. So if you are going to insert or your express your guide RNA in Cas9, and the expression is highest in the dividing cells, then you can assume and expect that the editing efficiency would be much higher, because in the cells which are not actively dividing, even if you have high Cas9 and guide RNA expression, that's not useful, because whenever editing is going to happen, that has to be passed on to next cells through cell division only. So if you use cell division specific promoters, then it enhances the editing efficiency. So in plants, AT, CDC45 and YAO, which are known to express in the cells undergoing division, active cell division, they have been already tried and tested, and this has been shown to improve the editing efficiency as well as inheritability. And the third aspect, reducing the off-target effects, because you are now only expressing your gene during the cell division. And another layer to that was coming up with the germline specific promoters, where you can either take male meiosis specific promoters, so that you will have your male gametes which are already edited before the fertilization happens, or egg specific promoter. This is particularly relevant in plants, because if you are not aware, in case of Arabidopsis, we use a floral dip method, where we use agrobacterium which has been transformed with the construct, and then we directly put it onto the ovaries of the plant, and it soaks up, and then agrobacterium gets inserted into the egg cells. It introduces tDNA into the egg cells, which gets integrated into the genome. So you can specifically engineer egg cells, which ensures that the next generation will be transgenics. So by making sure that your gametes are edited, you are ensuring the inheritability of the edit that you have made. So in plants, male meiosis specific promoters like DMC1, SPO11, which are important for recombination during meiosis, they have been tested. And in case of egg specific promoters in Arabidopsis, EC1 egg cell specific genes promoter has been tested, and both have been shown to give pretty high efficiency. Although, as I mentioned here, there is a variability that is observed. So in some studies, people have compared constitutive promoters versus germline specific promoters, and what they see is that some cases constitutive promoter has higher efficiency, editing efficiency, and in some cases the meiosis specific promoters had higher editing efficiency. Now again, it may depend what is the level of expression. So your promoter may be specifically expressing in germ cells, but what is the level of expression? Usually the constitutive promoters are expressed at very low levels in the germ cells. Somehow they are not able to express very highly, but these are specific to meiosis, so they must be high expressing. But then again, a choice has to be made that the promoter that you are using, they may be meiosis specific, but the expression level should also be high enough so that the editing efficiency is not compromised. But one thing is that, so that is the take home lesson from this slide. I would say that the overall germline specific promoters are, ensure the inheritability of the mutation to next generation, but the editing efficiency, if you don't want to be compromised compared to constitutive promoters, then only those promoters have to be chosen which are meiosis specific and also have very high expression in the myocyte. So that is crucial. Otherwise, you may compromise the editing efficiency. And then in some cases, you do not want inheritability. For example, if you are working with the genes and if those mutations are inheritable, you may not regenerate any plants because that gene is, let's say, crucial for the survival or of the plant. So in those cases, for example, if I edit a gene which is important for the male fertility, and now it is male sterile line, I cannot now multiply it. So I do not want it to be inherited to next generation, so that or I want to study the effect of certain genes mutation on, let's say, cell wall of particular tissue. But if that cell wall gets modified, the plant does not survive, it dies. So in those cases where you are working with genes which are important for the survival of the plant, you may want to go with the tissue specific promoters which will only engineer in the vegetative tissue so that you can study phenotypes. This is mostly for the research aspect where you use CRISPR editing for functional genomic studies, where you want to study the functions of the genes which are important for the survival. So if you do editing and you're not able to regenerate any plant, likely that this gene is crucial for the survival of the plant. And how you can check that whether it is or not, by using a vegetative tissue specific promoter which will not be inherited to next generation. So people have tried that also, like in root and xylums of tobacco, whereby using those promoters, and they were able to at least get the tissue which was edited and engineered, and they could see the impact of the gene on the overall development of the plant. Although in this also has been reported to have sometimes leaky expression because most of the vegetative state specific promoters are not very well characterized in most of the systems. So the choice of the promoter again becomes tricky, because sometimes what seems like a root specific in vivo studies, when you actually use it for genome editing, you might see some leaky expression in other tissues also. So, and there is another important component that now I'll come to, which is inducible promoters. So inducible promoters, which means that you can induce the expression of the Cas9 and guide RNA at your will. So you can do editing in a very, very precise manner. And this is particularly important to remove the off-target effects. So for example, if I'm going to induce the expression of Cas9 and guide RNA only for a couple of hours by giving this, the agent which is going to induce the expression, I'm ensuring that the editing is not happening here and there, because otherwise if it is continuously expressing all the time, it has opportunity to bind at other sites and cause off-target effects. But if it is inducible system, we can actually optimize it to that precise level that your editing is only happening at the target regions that you want to, and it is not leading to off-target effects. And in actually fact, this has been demonstrated in case of plant studies, especially for heat shock proteins. Their promoters have been tested. HSP26 promoter has been tested for genome editing. And in rice as well as maize, which are actually crop plants, it has been shown that the editing efficiency was a high editing efficiency was achieved with lowered off-target effects by using heat-inducible promoters. So that the off-targets were reduced significantly when the heat-inducible promoters were used. Although again, you have to make sure that for how long and how much temperature has to be applied. So this has to be optimized. Your promoter has to be optimized first, so for the precise control. And that is usually done by using some sort of reporter studies first before you go ahead and use these promoters. So for example, if I want to test an inducible promoter and I want to see for how long I should induce it and how much should be the concentration of the inducer, or what should be the optimal temperature for induction, what I would do is I will fuse the promoter with a reporter gene, which could be a GUS, GFP, any visual promoter that you would like to use. And then we see that by using different concentration and different time levels, how do the reporter expression changes, the editing efficiency changes, and that can give you clue to optimize the exact time and the temperature or concentration required for using heat inducible or any inducible promoters. So as a matter of fact, so this has already been done for rice and maize and has been demonstrated to give very high efficiency with very low off target effects. And another study has been done in tobacco where estrogen was used to induce genome editing. Although this was not very successful in terms of mutation efficiency because the penetration of the estrogen into plant tissue was the concern that it could not really penetrate well into the germline cells and cause the editing for it to be inherited to next generation. But that can be taken care of by using alternate strategies and can be optimized further. So in plants, these are the two types of inducible promoters that have been tried and tested so far. But as far as animals and microbes are concerned, I know people are exploring even light inducible promoters, because in plants, light has other sort of factors that it is going to control. For example, if you give a certain wavelength light, it can not only, other than inducing Cas9 expression, it can induce expression of some other genes in a light dependent manner, because plants are very, very responsive to light. So it is difficult to design a promoter which is light inducible in case of plants, but in case of microbes and animal cells, light inducible promoter has also been used for genome editing. And there are also studies where people have come up with the synthetic promoters which much higher efficiency compared to housekeeping or the other native endogenous promoters. So these are some of the different choices that you have when you are designing your construct of the choice of the promoter for doing the studies. And what will be the important consideration based on which you are going to decide that which system I should go with and which promoter I should choose depends on whether you are looking for single edit or multiplex edit. So these are some of the considerations that I put on one slide, which probably will help you to make a decision that what will be the right expression construct for your study. If you are going to do a single edit, which means you are going to use just single guide RNA, Pol3 promoters are also equally good. So you don't really have to look for Pol2 promoters. Any Pol2 good efficient Pol2 or Pol3 promoter will do. But if you are going to do with multiplex editing, then you might want to use the single promoter system with multiple guide RNAs, and that can be processed. So high efficiency, preferably Pol2 promoter, because Pol3 promoters cannot, as I said, transcribe longer transcripts. So again, the length of your transcript in terms of whether you are doing multiplex and or single editing would determine which promoter you should go with. Although there is no harm, if you are using single guide RNA, there is no harm of using Pol2 promoter. But if you are using with multiplex editing, then Pol2 is preferred. So ideally, if you use Pol2 promoters, then you are safe for both single and multiplex editing. Then how much is the inheritability of your interest? So as I said, in some cases, you may not want it to be inherited, and you may not because of the importance of the gene. So the nature of the transcript will decide whether the inheritability is important and what is the aim of your study. Based on that, also the decision can be made. Then size of vector is very, very crucial, especially for plant biotechnologies, because we have very limited mode of transformation of the plants. So mostly we either use agrobacterium mediated transformation or particle bombardment. Or people have now started coming up with the protoplast transformations and trying to regenerate, but that's very, very tedious process where you transform protoplasts first and then you actually regenerate the whole plant. Another field which is coming up because this has become the bottleneck for editing in case of plant biotechnology per se, because the transformation efficiencies are really low in plants. So people have come up with the nanoparticles and magnetic particles to transform the plants. And I myself has done one of the studies where we use magnetic particles to, we tried to put the vector construct onto the magnetic particles and then use magnetofection to transform the pollen. So once the pollen is transformed, then you can actually use that pollen to pollinate the other plant, and that way you can have your mutation transferred to the next generation. But the study that we did showed that this mode of transformation is not successful, particularly for monocots and even for dicots, which have very small pores in case of pollen, because the size of the vector becomes a constraint there, that the pore size is way too small, whereas the vector is much bigger in size because of the multiple guide RNAs and Cas9 and other things that you need to select for the transgene. So if you can get away with the selection markers and you can use a single promoter system, for both Cas9 and guide RNA, maybe the mode of transformations, that can also be improved by using nanoparticles and doing the transformation directly of the pollen, which way you can get away with the tissue culture procedure which is followed in the plant biotechnology lab. So this is again an area which needs extensive research before we can make any conclusions. Again, the mutagenesis efficiency and off-target effects, sometimes there is a trade-off, as I said, when you're using inducible promoters or when you're using the germline specific promoters, the mutagenesis efficiency may be lower compared to the constitutive promoters, but the off targets are less. So there is a trade-off. So depending upon what is your aim, you might want to choose one over the other. Although this is not the case always, in some cases people have shown that they use germline promoter and that was giving higher efficiency even compared to constitutive promoters. So this is not always the case that if you use germline specific promoters, then the efficiency will be lower. In many cases, it has been reported even higher also. So depends on the choice. So this is one factor which is really, really crucial, and I'm highlighting it more because this is related to the research that I'm doing in my lab, which I'm now coming to in the next slide, where we are trying to find out the germline specific promoters, not only the ones which are expressing in the germ cells, but also the expression should be high enough so that the editing efficiency is not compromised. And in terms of allelic, you see that sometimes if you just get monoallelic, that is not useful. You want to have biallelic edits to ensure that both the copies of the gene are edited. And in terms of that also, again, your decision of the promoter would impact this. And finally, the host to be edited has been shown to respond differently. So far, whatever studies and different promoters that I just talked about has been worked out in past 2 to 3 years. And these studies are limited to only these plants. Most of them are actually, 80% are coming from Arabidopsis, as you can expect. It's easier system to follow. And some studies, 1 or 2 studies each have been carried out in maize, rice, cotton, tobacco, and tomato. And all of them, the hosts respond differently to the same thing. So sometimes it is hard to make a conclusion based on one system and one study, because one promoter might be efficiently working in one system, but when you move to another one, then the efficiency decreases. Just to give you an example, there is a study where Arabidopsis high editing efficiency, more than 99% efficiency has been reported for Arabidopsis using U6 promoter. But when the same promoter was used in cotton, then the efficiency was lower. But when endogenous cotton promoter was used, then the efficiency improved. So there are host specific factors that need to be considered to come up with the exact good system for editing, and that has to be done for each host. So depending upon what target you are working on, the other studies can give you good hints, and you can learn from others' experience, but you have to work it out for your own system, that what works best for your own system. So customizing these constructs, whether it is Cas9 or whether it is guide RNA or whether it is promoter, has to be done once for each crop species to ensure that we have optimized expression cassette for each system. And the research in my lab for past 5-6 years has mostly been focused on sorghum. These are different varieties of sorghum which are available across the world. And these range from bioenergy sorghum to grain sorghum to sweet sorghum. These are different varieties which are shown here of sorghum itself. The grain sorghum is the one which is mostly used for food, for consumption. In Hindi, we call it as jawar, and some of you might have tasted jawar chapatis also. In Rajasthan, this is very famous that people eat jawar rotis. And then there is some forage sorghums which are mostly used as animal livestock feed. And we have bioenergy sorghums, which are very good source of lignocellulosic biomass for the production of biofuels. And we have sweet sorghum, which actually accumulates sugars in their stalks, just like sugarcane. So in a way, in one crop, you are getting all these benefits. And if these can be edited to engineer these traits, you can imagine that we can have a crop which is able to meet the needs of the food, as well as animal feed, as well as biofuel in one go. So the sugar which accumulates in sweet sorghum has also a potential candidate for the biofuel production. In fact, the biofuel policy of India that came up and had a target of coming up with the biofuel mixing with the fossil fuels by this year, by 2025, I guess, the sorghum was one of the major target choices there. So it is India, in fact, is the second largest producer, so it grows very well in India, and we see a huge genetic diversity. This is just the very four different varieties which are shown, but we have a huge genetic diversity in sorghum, and it has high nutritional content. It's a gluten-free crop, and with high protein content, high zinc content, high iron content, and it is climate ready in the sense that you can imagine it grows in Rajasthan, where you have limited water available, and in south also, where the conditions are not very conducive to for crops like rice, maize, and sugarcane, which need much more amount of water. And as I said, according to national policy of Biofuels India, this is also a good target for biofuel production in the country. And the best part about this that I like is that no part of the plant gets wasted. So the grains are either used for food purpose, and the stalks can either be converted to make juice, which can be used to make jaggery production or ethanol production. The bagasse, which is left after juice production, is used to the paper industry for biocomposting and so on. And the vinasse, which is left after the fermentation of the juice to make jaggery, is also used to make, as a fertilizer or production of methane gas. So basically no part of the plants get wasted. You get the full value of the effort that has been put in place. And it is a self-pollinating crop, which means that hybrid breeding is not really easy to do with this crop. So when I started my research, my focus was to come up with the genome edited lines, which are male sterile, so that we can do hybrid breeding by using male sterile lines. Although there are other traits that has been on focus with other collaborators within and outside India. So right now I have several projects dealing with different components of the sorghum, including the grain yield, nutritional content, the Brix content, which is the sugar that accumulate in the stem, abiotic stress tolerance, cell wall engineering. But today I'm going to specifically focus on the anther development part of the project that we are working on. So this project started where we started growing plants in IRI in Delhi of sorghum. These are just the field pictures, and we could correlate the development of anther stages with the flag leaf position on the plants by observing the plants and sacrificing some of them. So in case of these grasses, if you're not familiar, the panicle, which is the flower or inflorescence, it is actually within this leaf stalk. So you have to actually sacrifice the plant, remove all the leaves, then only you will be able to see what stage inflorescence is. And if you want to really collect the flower samples at this meiotic stage, where the anthers are going meiosis and the early microspore stage, you have to actually catch the plants at that stage where the inflorescence has not come out yet. So the flowering has not happened yet. So we had to correlate by looking at the flag leaf that what will be the stage where meiosis would be happening. So we first did some studies here with the microtomy to find out what is the stage where meiosis happens. So these are the microtomic sections of anthers of sorghum. Here you are seeing the meiocytes and then microspores and mature pollen. So we could extract 3 different stages of anthers from these plants, and then we decided to go ahead and do Illumina sequencing. So this was a DST sub funded PCR project that I got at JNU. So we could then see the expression profiles, and obviously the idea was to focus on these genes which have higher expression in the meiocytes, and then it goes down. So we did not have many genes which were expressing specifically in meiocytes, because many of them had expression in the, although expression goes down with the development, but we saw that not many genes were such that which are specific to early meiocyte stage. So this was one observation which did not hit me very hard at that time, but now I'll come that what it meant later when we tried to come up with the promoters for genome editing. Then there were much larger number of genes which had expression higher in the later stages. So as you can expect, there are more genes which are expressing in the pollen samples compared to the ones in the early initial meiocyte or meiosis stages. So in parallel, we were also doing small RNA sequencing. Dr. Namrata had joined my lab as NPDF, so that we thought that we will do small RNA sequencing also from the anther stages, so that we can get regulatory cascades of how this development is happening. And obviously, before we publish it, we had to see the correlation in the expression of the miRNAs and the targets that were predicted. So the above panel shows the qPCR of the expression of the miRNAs that were expressing in the meiotic stages, represented by blue one, and the post-meiotic stages, which is yellow here. So we just narrowed down 2 genes because PODAN was not of our interest for these studies. So we just focused on meiotic and post-meiotic stages, and we did small RNA profiling. And what we were hoping was that we will see an inverse correlation with the target. So which means that if miRNA expression increases, the target expression should decrease. And that is what we observed with most of them, that as the miRNA expression was increasing, its target's expression was decreasing in the post-meiotic stages. But these few of the miRNAs did not show a negative correlation. They showed a positive correlation in the sense that miRNA expression was going down, the target is also going down. So which was not expected, which was opposite to what we thought. And then we surveyed literature and tried to find out, is there anything known about this particular miRNAs and why we are not seeing the targets being affected with the miRNA expression. And we realized that there were recent studies which have been carried out mostly in wheat and maize, where these miRNAs actually express in specific cell types. So mRNA 2775 is specifically expressing in tapetum and myocyte cells, whereas 2118 is specifically expressing in epidermis. So you can only see the target inverse correlation if you do expression profiling with these specific cell types. Because as you see, the anther is a complex tissue of different type of cell wall, epidermis, tapetum, middle lamella, then we have these sporocytes. And the amount of sporocytes is very, very less compared to the wall layer cells which are present. So most of the time the expression of the myocytes is actually masked by the transcripts which are expressing at very high levels in other cell types. So maybe most of the genes that we see and the transcripts that we see are actually coming from the anther wall and not from the myocytes. So even if we did the transcriptomics with anther stages, but because we had taken complete anthers, and this whole thing, anthers are there, and along with the filament. So most of the time what we are seeing as high expression is actually coming from the anther walls and not from the myocytes, because many of these genes and their regulatory elements that we later figured out, there are link RNAs which are regulating these genes, there are facey RNAs which are regulating. These are also another category of small RNA. I'll not go into details of those, but we realized that there is a very tight regulation of meiosis specific genes by these regulatory RNAs, and that is occurring in a very cell type specific manner. So by just taking the full anthers, we cannot really identify myocyte specific promoters. And so just to confirm this observation, what we did, we picked up all the genes which are shown to be specifically involved in meiosis in plants, mainly rice and Arabidopsis, and identified their homologs and saw the expression in case of sorghum. These are 2 stages of ovary, pistil of the plant, and these are 3 stages of anther that I just talked about. And we observed that we do not see all these genes are specifically involved in meiosis, but we could not see a particular trend where we were expecting that those should be expressing very high level in the meiotic stage compared to other stages. So most of the genes, either they're expressing at very high levels in all the stages, all anthers and pistil. I'm only showing part of this data, but there were other stages that we tried, which are vegetative stages like leaf, root, meristem, and there was a lot of noise there also. And in fact, a lot of the meiosis genes we did not even see their expression. So if we just depend on anther expression, then we would say that these genes are likely not important for meiosis. Nobody can see this data and say that these genes are important for meiosis, but all their orthologs have been characterized in rice or Arabidopsis for involvement in meiosis. And as if you just for the information, the meiosis is a very, very conserved process across species. So we have compared the orthologs in rice, Arabidopsis, maize, wheat, and then to human, mouse, yeast. And we have found that these genes which are involved in meiosis are conserved across species material, whether it is plants or animals. So meiosis is a very, very conserved process. So it is not that if these genes are involved in meiosis in rice and Arabidopsis, maybe they are not involved in meiosis in sorghum. This is very less likely, not with these many genes, because this process is very, very conserved. And in fact, most of the genes which are characterized for meiosis in plants, they come based on the orthology with the animal genes. They have already been characterized in yeast, mouse, or human, and then people looked at their orthologs in plants and confirmed their role in meiosis. So meiosis is a very, very conserved process. So this was surprising for us that by looking at our data, we are not able to see the pattern that is expected. So what we realized was that if you really want to design the germline specific promoters, which are specifically expressing in myocytes, looking at anther expression is not going to be helpful, because what will happen is that these promoters will have higher expression in the anther wall layers compared to myocytes, and maybe that is the reason why people saw lower editing efficiency when they use germline specific promoters, because those germline specific promoters have been extracted by the transcriptomics of whole anthers, not the different cell types. So that is when I wrote another project to DST, where I aim to identify tissue specific genes first, which are specifically expressing in anthers. So we will use promoters of these genes only that we have extracted based on orthology. Some of the candidates will be taken, and then we will make transgenics where there is a promoter and we have the reporter, which is Gus in this case, the picture that you are seeing, and we will confirm that these promoters are specifically expressing in the anther tissue first. So that is the first step to do, that they should be expressing specifically in anthers. And as you can see, this particular promoter is specific. This picture is for the rice transgenic, not the sorghum one, but this promoter is specifically expressing in anthers. So the idea is to find out these kind of promoters which are specifically expressing at high levels in anthers, and then confirm their tissue specificity by going with the sectioning of the anthers, and then do a laser capture microdissection to remove the myocytes, separate out from the anther wall layers, and again do a qPCR of these genes which we have shortlisted to confirm that whether they are expressing in myocytes or in the anther wall layers, because this is the only way we can ensure that we are using a male myocyte specific promoter without compromising the editing efficiency. And these would also be helpful in, again, making male sterile lines, the first objective that I just started the project with. So we right now this project is already just funded. I'm looking for a JRF for this project also. We just advertised it, so you can also spread the word to your students if they are interested, where the student will actually do a laser capture microdissection with the anthers, and then we will, whatever genes we already shortlisted, we will be doing qPCR with the RNA extracted from specific anther wall cell types, and then those promoters would be the targets for male germline specific editing, so which will be a follow-up analysis. And with that, I think I'm done, and I'm happy to take the questions.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. So it was really an enlightening session, and I think all of us learn a lot about this different avenue of CRISPR-Cas based uh, editing in case of sorghum, especially. I really loved the work that you did.
Thank
So
you.
all the participants. So if you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself to ask question from Professor Sharma. So if there are any questions, then please write down your questions here. So, ma'am, we are getting many compliments for you. So it was a wonderful session.
Thank you, but I would love to have some questions. And
Yeah.
yeah, is anyone among the group doing editing, and do you have any experience with the promoters? Maybe we would love to listen your experience if anyone has tried different promoters for genome editing.
I
Is
think
anyone here trying editing in the lab?
I don't think, because I think that is why they have come to this FDP to learn how we can
Right.
use CRISPR for their lab research also. So I have one question, Dr. Sharma. So like if we are using these different kind of promoters, let's say other than plants, so do we need to take care of the promoter associated with promoter based genome editing in other organisms as well, like if we talk about parasites?
So that is true. That is what whatever we talked about, because the studies I limited to promoters which have been done based on the studies in plants, but
Mhm.
people have tried different promoters in other systems also, in microbial system and animal systems, and the
Okay,
editing efficiency, inheritability, and off targets, they all are impacted by the choice of the
impacted by
promoter.
it.
So this is a general guideline for
Mhm.
anyone doing editing in any system, that the
Mhm.
promoter of choice is the one which is going to impact the overall efficiency of the system.
Okay, and I think that would differ from one system to another because
That, yes,
every organism has a different kind of promoter system.
right. So
So,
if we are going
yeah.
with this technology to do editing in the future or make engineered lines, then for each system that has to be taken care of one system at a time. So to have a better standardized system would be better.
Okay, so we have now questions coming in. So, Dr. Rishika Patel, she wants to ask that how to develop genetic circuits with multiple promoter reporters with AND or gateway.
I'm not sure if I really get your question, Dr. Rishika. Can you unmute yourself and elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, actually, I was working on the detection of multiple pollutant on microbial system. So we would like to develop some circuit, genetic circuit, by which I can detect, say, for example, monoaromatic aromatic hydrocarbon, polyaromatic hydrocarbon, or the biphenyls at a time with the one particular signal. Right now, we have developed three different plasmid for all, for one for monoaromatic, second for polyaromatic, and third for biphenyls. Yeah. So if I would like to, combine all three promoter, reporter in one circuit using the AND or that particular A and D or the OR gateway kind of the way. So is there any way? How can I construct such kind of circuit?
It is difficult to answer this question for me, because that again depends on the system that you're working on. But what I know, that in case of plants also, where like when we do multiple gene editing, sometimes people try to put multiple guide RNAs under the same promoter, and as in your case you are targeting different pathways, and in those cases people try to use individual promoters, because the expression of all of those genes that you are trying to mutate is not it is not same level of editing that you might want from all of them. So in some cases you might want to use individual promoters for each of those pathways, but the construct size becomes huge. But that will be your major concern, that if you put all of them in the same construct, and then the transformation would be a huge problem, right? So that is what that is the constraint that in plants also we are facing, that as the size of the construct becomes bigger, but what people have done is that they have made a library of plasmids, and then they have done core transformation of multiple plasmids in the hope that both of them get integrated. Like you do multi-gene editing, where either you can have both of them in the same vector, or you have one construct targeting your one of the components and other construct, and then you transform them together. So, and then you screen for those which have perceived both of them and integrated both of them. So that is what has been tried in case of plants, at least.
Okay,
But I'm
so
not
we
sure. Yeah.
tried that second option. You said the transformation of the both plasmid in the one particular organism. We tried it, but what happens when we transfer both the, there are the compatibility issues. So one
Right.
plasmid is going to retain from the system. So it is not going to help us for the longer period. I think so.
Right.
1 or 2 days is, yeah. Then after we see the retainability of the plasmid or any one plasmid from the system.
Yeah, that is a common problem that people see in code transformation also. Sometimes the system just removes one. Other possibility is that you let one integrate and you have the stable line, and then you do a code transformation with the second one. In that case, the chances of retaining is higher than code transforming both of them together. Because when you're code transforming both of them are trying to integrate. But if you've already stably created one line, which is having one transformed already integrated, then you apply the second one on the transgenic one. Then in that case, the retention is probably would be better.
Okay, I will try. Thank you so
I
much,
know
ma'am.
it's not easy things to try. It's
Yeah.
easier said than done. But when you
Yeah.
have to work for like 6 months to just try this thing, it's difficult.
Actually,
But
it's take
yeah,
almost 3 years to
right,
construct three plasmids.
right. So now, yeah, I think what I would suggest is that if you are seeing this core transformation problem, just make with one stable line and then transform with the second one. So in those cases, people have seen more success than core
Okay.
transformation.
Sure. Thank you so much, ma'am.
I think that helps you, Professor Rushika Patel. So, any other questions from the participants? I think all of them will take little time to absorb what they have learned today, because it was a
Sure.
lot of data that you have shared with all of us, and slowly they'll come up with the questions.
Of
So
course.
I will redirect these questions that we received from the participants on your email, ma'am, so
Sure,
that
I'll be
if they have
happy to
any
take.
specific questions, so you can answer them over email. So, but other than that, ma'am, I have one question. Like,
Case,
how
yeah.
easy is it to transform these CRISPR constructs in case of plants?
They're as good as normal constructs that they're not very different from the
Okay, not
other
this.
normal transformation
Okay,
procedures that we do. It's just that initially when people were using multiple guide RNAs, they were trying multiple promoters. That was making it bulkier. But
okay,
now with the Pol2 promoter and multiplex editing, it's no way different from usual transgenic. But it is just that the number of people who are trying to do engineering has increased now, so there is more work coming up,
yeah.
because earlier people would just do transgenics for functional genomic studies because
Mhm.
there was no hope for commercialization. But now people are more forthcoming and trying to adopt this technology, so there are more number of researchers and there are people who are coming up with the improved transformation procedures. So I think we are in any way benefiting by this technology indirectly, that more people are trying to introduce and better transformation protocols are coming and different methods are coming up now.
I think it's a very handy tool for scientists to be more creative,
Right.
more
So
smartly choosing different types of constructs to achieve what the outcomes they are expecting.
right.
So,
And some of you, if you've not started editing yet and you might be wondering, I was hoping those kind of questions, that
yeah,
how do I start? Where do I get the vector? Because these are the
mhm,
first things that you face, that where are the vectors available. So there is a
exactly.
website called AdGene.
Yeah.
If you go there, then those vectors which are already published, most of the researchers, they actually contribute their vectors strains to that AdGene repository, and there is a nominal cost involved in getting the vectors from there. So if you just write them and you pay the money, the vector will be delivered to you. And the advantage of taking vector from them over any lab is that if the vector is somehow modified or mutated, it may not work. But AdGene cross checks everything and sequence everything before they send it to you. And if you are like in people belonging to countries like India, there is even reduction of cost, there is a discount also. So if you mention that you are just a small lab and you don't have funding, they even give discount to deliver the construct. So I would encourage you to look at the AdGene repository to see what kind of constructs are available for genome editing, and that way you can start ordering. Or if there is anyone working somewhere, then you can even take from your colleagues. But going from the repository usually is a safer way than taking from another lab.
That's an important information. I think everyone in the meeting should please note this thing. If you want to start work on CRISPR, then AdGene is a good place to trust on starting your work. Yeah, AdGene, Professor. Yes. So, to sum up what we have learned today in this third session of our faculty development today. So, Professor Sharma has explained us the role of promoters in actually introducing genome editing in plants specifically. Also, we have learned that how tissue-specific promoters can be used, and different types of tissue promoters can be targeted for different kinds of plants, and choosing right expression construct in either single or multiplex editing is an important factor, and all the components associated with the expression construct, how we can manipulate them to get the desired results. Also, Professor Rita explained her how genome editing research that she has started in her lab, and how it has progressed, and what all different levels of results were obtained, and how she actually made very keen observations, and she was able to derive new kind of conclusions from the study. And that was really interesting part of her presentation. And also how the genes can be identified regulating the male fertility in case of sorghum, which is a part of her ongoing research project. That was again very fascinating. And especially for the new people who are thinking to start CRISPR, Professor Rita explained the factors that we should consider while designing a perfect CRISPR construct. These were really very important. So with that, I would like to pay sincere thanks and our gratitude to Professor Sharma for sharing all her experience, her lab data, and and the conclusions also, ma'am, that you made, that the real time observations that you had, because as a scientist you have worked in the lab, what all problems a person can face while working on a CRISPR system. So that was very practical, and that was something to learn from. So it was really amazing
Thank you.
to have a insight of something like it is happening in the lab. So we were able to actually travel that whole journey of CRISPR-Cas in case of sorghum.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. And I hope everybody got something. And I probably, you feel free to contact me if you have any questions, or anyone wants to collaborate on plant genome editing or not. This is not the right forum to talk about it, but no, you can always drop me an email. And thank you so much,
Definitely.
Dr. Meghna, for the opportunity. I always like interacting with you, and thanks a lot.
My pleasure,
And best
ma'am. So
wishes. You have summarized everything so nicely. I was just looking at you. She knows better now. So thank you so much.
so I'm the most attentive student here sitting.
Yeah, coordinators have to be. I've done that job before, so I know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Have a great weekend, ma'am.
Same to you, and have a nice weekend to everyone, and Happy New Year ahead.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
So all
I'll
the
just leave
participants.
now.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. So all the participants, I think that was a wonderful session today. And with this, we close our faculty development program that was going on since last 5 days. And I hope all of you have learned a lot. All of you are able to grasp many important topics and related to genome editing. So we'll now have a test, assessment test based on what we have learned at 2:30 p.m. today. So I'll share the link in the WhatsApp group that we have created, as well as those who are not on WhatsApp, I'll share the link on email as well. So please be ready for the assessment test. Revise what we have done since last 5 years, because I have included the questions from each and every session. So you have to just sit down and think what you have heard in each and every session, and you need at least 60% marks to qualify for the certification for this program. So have a happy weekend and all the best for the test to come. So the link would be active for 30 minutes. So it is a 30 minutes test, and it consists of 30 MCQs, and it is at 2:30. So 2:30 p.m. So 30 questions in 30 minutes. You have to be very fast, and please maintain academic honesty.